Well, welcome everybody who's joined us live today for the second call in a series of monthly calls that we're doing on addiction, and we've invited each speaker to speak choose something from our book, Addiction: One Cause, One Solution, and speak to that, to whatever they choose. And today our speaker is Jason. Jason, is it Jason Shiers or Jason Shiers?
Shiers.
Shiers, and who's our guest speaker today. And I've known Jason for a few years now, and he's been in recovery for a number of years, many years, and I think has had a similar experience to me of the inside out understanding, really transforming that recovery. Anyway, Jason can tell his own story in a moment, but before we turn to you, Jason, I'm going to invite my partner in crime, Barbara, to just say a little bit about the topic, which is of a new understanding of trauma. And could I just ask you, if you're joining us, if you're not speaking at the moment, to mute yourself. There's a bit of background noise and it makes the recording very sort of buzzy. So if you wouldn't mind muting, but there will be plenty of opportunity to come in, ask questions, share later on. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you, Jason. We're so glad you can be here. And Jason, like myself, has a history of being a therapist. So we both know a little bit more about the fact that the world of psychotherapy really turned with a great vengeance to the whole subject of trauma and trauma surviving following the Vietnam War. And I actually worked with a number of people who were involved in developing the diagnosis of PTSD. They were Vietnam vets themselves, and really were very, very interested in trying to help and support these vets who are coming home and suffering with all these really significant symptoms of hyper reactivity and, ongoing despair and suffering. And they wanted to do the best. But so I was a trauma therapist for I considered myself a trauma therapist, and I went to a lot of trauma conferences, and we did a lot, but I was noticing that a lot of the people that I had seen in my practice who had been diagnosed with PTSD really weren't doing very well. In fact, I would say they were doing worse than anyone I've ever seen. And so it was very discouraging, and I didn't really understand it until I came across this understanding. And so we really wanted to address this in this book, because we really feel that misunderstanding is a big part of what motivates people to continue to drink or to look for refuge in a substance. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Jason and thank him very much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to talk and see what comes out. I'll share about my experience, and sometimes I might highlight what I see now about that, or I might just say it as it was and then go back to it. It's like, but for me, I mean, it started my memory, of life as a young boy, started with a trauma, because, I was very close to my dad, and one day he went out and he never came back. He was killed in an accident, and I remember the police being at the door, and my mum screaming and sort of lying on the floor, kicking and screaming, and me sort of not going. I remember that so vividly as one of my earliest sort of memories of life. And from there it kind of it spiraled downhill. It spiraled downhill like pretty quickly, and food was my first escape, from life. And none of this was knowingly. It was all completely sort of out of any conscious awareness. There was no thoughts about grief or loss. I wasn't allowed to go to a funeral. I could put words to it, but they would be only words and thoughts that I'd learned later in life. They weren't of the experience then. And all I know is that food was very appealing to me, and the what would I call it? The excitement and the fun and the feeling of being okay. When I could steal food and get food and eat more and find ways of getting more food. And I noticed when I did my psychotherapy training, I remember they said to me, "Have you got any photos of your childhood?" And I said, "I don't know, I can ask my mum." So I asked my mum to send me these pictures of my childhood. And it was like there was loads of pictures with my dad before he was killed. And then there was these pictures of me ballooning in weight. But as what I noticed was that as I ballooned in weight and became more disconnected, that the photos got less and less each year, to the point where by the time I was 10 or 12 years old, there was like one picture, and that was it. And what happened in the in my experience was that as I became more disconnected, more withdrawn, more separate, felt more loneliness, food became more appealing, my weight ballooned, to the point where I was massively overweight by the time I was 7 or 8 years old. At 9 years old, ended up in psychiatric care, on medication, diagnosed, and again, I didn't even know that until perhaps 10, 15 years ago, when I applied for my psychiatric and medical records from when I was a child, and they were only available in paper format because they weren't even digital at that time. And I received all these psychiatric reports, about how withdrawn I was. They actually said that I was slow. They said that I had psychomotor retardation, and that I was withdrawn and had a problem with food, but they never mentioned grief or loss or anything like that. They weren't even in there. So they medicated me with an antidepressant. And, I stayed under psychiatric care on and off, for many decades. And, from there, it was like a constant attempt to escape myself, and I had this victim of trauma mentality, even as a young boy, it's kind of like, oh, because I lost my dad, this is what I do, and this feeling of separation and questioning existence, what am I doing here? What is this life all about? How come I've been given this, how come I've been handed this shitty experience of being alive? That's what I thought. And the escapism continued. By the time I was 13, I was smoking heroin and committing crime. And I remember the first time I took drugs. It was like I'd had many years by then of what I call the committee. I'm sure everyone's heard that term before. The committee in my head, was waiting for me every day when I woke up with a lot of noise about myself and how bad my life was and how bad I was and how, all these things. And it was like when I took heroin, which was the first drug I ever took, incidentally. I didn't go on that traditional progressive journey that we hear from many people. My mind went quiet. And it was like the very first time I'd had some respite from my own mind, and it was like this, oh God, yeah, it's kind of like not really knowing what I'd been suffering with or what I was struggling with all that time. It was just that first freedom from myself that I had. And of course, I'm going to keep doing that because it makes complete sense, right? I mean, if you've got a busy mind and you're struggling and you're suffering as a result of your busy mind, then finding something that takes you away from it, even if it's momentarily, becomes habitual, because that's how the system works. We're resilient. We find a way of escaping from our own thoughts. And so, yeah, I mean, from there, my story went on, and, I got heavily into organized crime and taking drugs to the point of being, homelessness and devastation, disowned by all my family, and, having nothing really, and constantly telling that story. One thing that I remember is that, if I ever told my story, the first thing I would say is, well, I lost my dad when I was a kid. That was the story. And then I went on to, get into crime, and I'm under, I've got this diagnosis, clinically depressed, and I would always be telling these things because of what I believed about myself, what I believed, because I'd been told them by these professionals. I thought they must be true. And you can see how we, in our innocence, perpetuate the idea of brokenness in that, that like we go to these professionals for help and they tell us that there's something wrong with us. And then we kind of go away saying that the diagnosis that we've got is the reason for the behavior, but it was always the behavior that we went to for the help for in the first place. It can't be the cause of it, so I always found that quite interesting in my later years as I started reflecting back on this. So yeah, I mean, I found recovery when I was 23. So I'd been in active addiction for 10 years, most of that as a heroin addict, and going to jail on and off and in and out of institutions, psychiatric care, under psychiatrists, completely alienated from family, and alone, committing crime, lived in a caravan, lived in a car, lived in a homeless shelter. It didn't look like there was much hope, I would say I felt hopeless. I'd kind of resigned. I like the word resigned because it was like I'd given up. I just resigned that this was my life, that I was going to take drugs and escape and take medication. I mean, it was quite funny back then, if you think about it, that when you go to the where do you go for a drug problem? You go to the community drug team. So what do the community drug team do? Oh, they give you more drugs. They give you more drugs to help you with your drug problem. It's like the Wales used to joke that the body doesn't know the difference between drugs that you buy on the street and drugs that you're medicated with, officially via a prescription. And it didn't, it was just more drugs for me, more escapism, more opportunity to escape my own mind. So yeah, I got clean when I was 23. I went to rehab. I was introduced to 12-step rehabilitation, and it was so. I remember telling the story of what had happened with my dad, and I was so. I really didn't see that connection, but I remember sort of talking about the experience that I had with my dad, and it was so painful. It was in me, that sort of. I just couldn't even speak about it. I couldn't even say it without being so full of emotion. And, while I was in treatment, I kind of was given all this, typical 12-step approach. You can't drink or use ever again, blah, blah, blah. You have to go to meetings for the rest of your life. You are an addict and you need to do this and that to be okay. It's kind of like you've got this disease and we can't really explain why, but you've got it. And, as long as you do these things that we suggest, you'll be okay. That was kind of like a summary of what was installed, into me. And I didn't understand belief systems then. I didn't understand thought. I didn't understand that I was adopting a new lie that was a better lie than the one I'd been telling myself before, but it still wasn't the truth. It still wasn't pointing me to the truth of who I was. And so I went on, for another 20 odd years, 2 decades of going to 12-step meetings, believing I was an addict, thinking that there was something wrong with me. I really thought struggling with every other addiction, struggling with food, again, struggling with pornography, struggling with sex, struggling with relationships, struggling with money. It was just really like a transference of addictions from one to another. I didn't want to use drugs and commit crime anymore and go to jail because I'd become so sick and tired of it, but I still couldn't sit with myself. I still couldn't be in my own skin. I still had that feeling of separation from the world, that feeling of aloneness, that desire to be somewhere else other than within me, And, I tried my best to live what was called what I was told was a productive life, become a productive member of society, by getting a job and getting an education. And I did really well in all those things. I've had a career ever since I got clean. I've had several businesses. I've done well for myself financially, and on the outside, I went from driving an old car when I first got clean to getting a new car and getting a house and all these things, it's like, and it really looked like, when we look at the material paradigm of the world, like that, as your life gets better on the outside, as you get more things, acquire more status, get more job titles, get the physical fitness that you want, all the things that all the places that we search for happiness, it really looked, to everyone else that I was doing really well. But inside, I was dying, I was empty, devastated, lonely, separate, in all those ways. So I kept going through these 12 steps with all these people. And and I was always questioning, well, maybe I got the wrong sponsor. Maybe somebody didn't really point me to the right step, or maybe I'm missing something in the steps, or what is this higher power, this spiritual awakening thing anyway? How does that happen? How do you get there? And people would just say, yeah, just keep coming back. It's kind of and there'd be all these stories told about what happens to people who stop going to meetings, and I really believed within myself that I would die, that I would relapse and die if I stopped going, So I kept going, but I was always questioning. I never gave up seeking or searching for something else. And that's how I ended up training to be a psychotherapist, because I went to therapy and, in the process of further seeking, and I really look back at seeking and I think, seeking is our intuition of home, our knowing that there is a home, and I remember people in 12 steps and therapy used to say, you need to stop seeking. You've got to stop seeking. That's what your problem is seeking. Yeah, you can just stop, it's kind of as if it's that easy, but really I see that constant seeking is really just our knowing that there is a home, there is a place of peace, a place of okayness within us, there always is. It's always there, never give up seeking. And so another 20 years of psychotherapy training that was so horrendously painful. I want to talk about that a little bit because, it was an experiential journey, a 4-year experiential journey. And during that 4 years, we had to bring our own stuff to training, so it was I really was told and believed innocently by a beautiful person that was my trainer, Shiers, and I still speak to her, even now. And it's I was really led to believe that that I could somehow get a different relationship with my past, with my trauma, by revisiting it and talking about it and reliving these experiences, in my adult life, because that was what was causing me all my problems. And that was what was keeping me disconnected from myself and other people and my attachment style and all the stuff that we learn in therapy, my life script, all those things that were relative to how I was living in the world and how I was escaping. So, I was a fearless volunteer. I was never scared of digging into stuff. I was always willing to do that. And I volunteered on every possible opportunity. I put myself forward. I lay on the floor crying. I did all sorts of stuff, feeling this experience. I still feel it, but I did all that stuff, thinking that it would somehow make me better, that it would somehow get me a better experience of me or being alive or feeling okay in the world. I trusted that. And what happened was I got so depressed, at 15 years clean, I was wanted to die. I wanted to commit suicide, and I didn't want to get out of bed. It was so dark at that time. And it makes sense, if you think about it, because all I was doing was digging into this pain that I had inside of me and talking about this experience that I had as a kid. And, if you talk about painful things, then you feel pain. You cast your thinking onto painful experiences and keep thinking about them. It makes complete sense that you start to feel miserable, and if I didn't have my daughter, at the time, she was 3, I guess. And I always remember this, that I used to have her on my own, and I had this cabin bed, and I used to go into her room. And watch this bed from the door to see if I could see a little chest moving in the bed, you know, because she was the only light that I had, the only joy, the feeling of being alive, you know, when you're present with your little girl of 3 years old, you know, it's like such a beautiful thing. And I used to go in expecting her to be cold every day, you know, and it's like if I couldn't see her little chest moving because she was buried under the covers, I used to go over to the bed and put my hand into the bed until I felt some warmth, you know. As soon as I felt that warmth, it was like a sigh of relief, you know, like I felt so, oh God, yeah, you know, because that was the thing that I was alive for in my mind, you know. And, you know, I finished my psychotherapy training and they said to me, you know, you're ready to open a practice. And I was like, you know, how can I help anyone? You know, I'm so miserable, you know, it's kind of like, I don't feel equipped or in any way, you know, it's like, I'd really learn to sit with people in their pain and sort of create this theoretical framework around why people are how they are and what they need to do to get better and so on. But in some ways it conflicted within me because I hadn't got better. You know, I was still felt it. I was still depressed and struggling. And you know, so I kept seeking. I never gave up that seeking, you know, and from there I went to the Hoffman process and I went to the Landmark Forum and I did silent meditations and I did all this stuff for years. You know, I did qualified in NLP, in CBT. I had a long list of credentials. I had a master's degree in transactional analysis. I was a qualified person-centered therapist. And, you know, and I just was miserable, you know. And meantime, I was maintaining my 12-step recovery, going to meetings 3 times a week and saying how wonderful my life was through gritted teeth and going home and acting out on other addictions that I felt shame about and I didn't want to tell people about. And all underlined by this belief that I was now I changed my thinking to the fact that I was a survivor of trauma, but it was still affecting me. You know, that this trauma was still the very thing. And I had this unexplainable thing within me that couldn't be gotten rid of and couldn't be transcended, and that was somehow on a daily basis affecting my experience of life, you know. And so I ended up in Tony Robbins, and you know, I went to these Tony Robbins events, you know, all over the world, and like they were very high energy, long day type experiences. And I was in Florida, in Palm Beach, you know, and I was at this Tony Robbins event, and about 5 or 6 years ago, and they were doing this thing where you write down how you want to feel based on certain circumstances and all that. And I just sat there and I thought, this is bullshit, you know, this isn't how anything works, you know. And I just sat there watching everyone writing all this stuff down, and I that was it. I didn't go back, you know. I didn't go back to Tony Robbins. But you know what happened after that, and I say there's no coincidences in life, you know, like kind of strange, but I joined this personal development group with a group of people, and because I'd had this career in IT and was quite smart with computers, someone said, can you download some videos from the internet and share them with this group? Now, one of the videos that I happened to come across in Hay House was called The Path of Effortless Change. I still feel that, you know, finding that video, whether it was luck, you know, or coincidence, or whether I was just guided there. But the only way I could share this video was to watch it, because I couldn't download it. I couldn't find a way to download this video, you know, so I had to screen record it. And as I screen recorded it and listened to it, and it was playing next to me, I just found myself mesmerized by what this guy was talking about. And I couldn't, at that time, I couldn't intellectually comprehend what he was saying, you know, but I knew there was a part of me, you know, when Sid Banks talks about knowing, you know, it's kind of like there was something in me that knew. There was not my brain, my onboard computer saying, yes, this sounds good, you need to know more. It was a deeper resonance within me that said, you've got to hear more about this, whatever it is, there's something here. And, you know, I shared that video and talked about my experience with a friend of mine. And a year later, I was going to LA to a coaching thing, and I just remembered that moment that I'd had with that video. And I said, I remember that guy, Michael Neal. I'm sure he lives in LA. So I looked at his website, and I remember it was the 17th of April that I was going to be leaving LA on the 15th. And I said, oh, this guy's doing an event on the 17th of April. I'm supposed to be leaving on the 15th. I'm sure I'm meant to be there. You know, I've got to be there. That's what it's for. And so I extended my trip, and then I found out how much it cost, and I didn't have the money, you know, to go. And I spoke to my friend, and she paid for me to go, you know, and it was, and I went there, and I had my typical change worker psychotherapist head on, you know, where I thought I knew everything about change, because I really did. You know, I thought, you know, I've done 12 steps for 20 years. I've been a therapist for years, blah, blah, blah. I've got all these credentials, letters after my name, qualifications. What is this guy going to teach me? And this thing's really expensive. And he's saying we've got 2 hours for dinner. I mean, like, how much money's worth are we going to get out of this? You know, it was like this real, I could see how busy my mind was, you know. It's really difficult to have a big ego about who you think you are and be desperately wanting to change, you know, because like the two things conflict. Because I like show up somewhere new and I want to talk about how much I know and how great I am, you know, from that place of kind of having a, you know, from place of insecurity, because that's the truth, you know. I was just insecure and lost. And Michael, I remember he said to me, you know, can you just put that book down and just be here? You know, and there was this invitation to be present. There's this invitation to listen beyond what I thought I knew. He said, can you not try and see if this is like something you know, or like something you've heard before, or, you know, like it was an invitation to listen beyond my thinking mind, you know, beyond what I thought I was going to hear, beyond whether I thought I was getting my money's worth, you know. And it was strange the way he asked me, because I was just like, I was very submissive, you know. I just went, yeah, okay then. And I put my book down and I just kind of sat there. And I don't know what I heard. You know, I've got a notebook from that event, you know, and I look back at it and it still makes sense to me now when I look at it. But, you know, I remember two and a half days, I think it was, of, you know, going back and reading the Inside Out Revolution. And then at the end of these 2.5 days, I was sat outside this Airbnb, and I was looking at this kind of like green valley thing that there was at the back. I don't know why I randomly picked this Airbnb, but it just had this beautiful rope swing out the back. And I was sat on there on a Friday evening, the sun was going down, and I was looking, and it was like, I was thinking to myself, this feeling of calm that I have, this feeling of peace that I have, you know, I've never had this before. And it was like, and I just knew, you know, I knew that the search was over. I just knew. It was like, so many things went through my mind in that couple of hours while I sat there. It was like I'd woken up from a bad dream. It was like I saw this beauty of nature, of life, of the greenery. I could hear the birds, and I was thinking, there were times when my mind was kicking. I was going, well, I haven't got more money in the bank. I've not got a new job. Haven't got a new career. Haven't lost weight. You know, I haven't done all these I haven't found all these things that I really thought were the key to happiness. But I also knew that the search was over. I knew that I couldn't practice as a psychotherapist in the way that I'd been working before. I knew that, you know, I knew that I was home. You know, I knew that the seeking had been for this. I knew that, you know, and you know, that was such a powerful experience. And then after that, you know, I did Super Coach a couple of times, and I went through some of Michael's programs, and spent a year with Dr. Bill Pettit, you know, doing a mentoring thing. And, you know, it started to make sense to me. I started to teach this stuff in my work, you know, and what I'd realized, it's like I could talk about it then, because at the time when it happened, I couldn't really talk about it. But what I realized was that story of trauma, you know, that I carried with me on a daily basis as a victim or as a survivor or whatever it was I told it as, you know, it was like, it was, you know, I realized that there's two you know, that when something happens, there's always what happens as a neutral experience, and then there's what we make it mean about ourselves, you know. And I realized that the second part of that, you know, what I made it mean about myself, is what I'd been running away from. I'd created this story my whole life on a daily basis. You know, I'd retold it about myself. It had become my identity. It'd become part of who I was in my own mind. And then I escaped from the story that I created about myself, you know, that I had been creating the story and then I had been escaping from it, which makes complete sense, that if you make up a shitty story of your life, that you escape from it. And from that point, addiction looked like, in its simplest form, you know, the mind's attempt to quieten in itself, you know, really the behavior, whether the addiction was about food or drugs or pornography or relationships or sex, was irrelevant. You know, that was just the attempt to quieten my own mind when it got busy. But what I didn't realize was that, you know, I was the creator of that, you know, that was just going on, you know, noise in my own mind to which I perpetuated and somehow had been innocently thrown into the typical Western psychological and psychiatric processes, you know, and believed what I'd been told about myself, and then gone away, you know, telling those, you know, adding those stories to this idea of myself that I was creating in my own mind. So, you know, so at that point, I kind of like thought, well, I can't practice psychotherapy anymore. You know, I like you, Barbara, I'd been to all these trauma things. It's like I said specifically that I worked with trauma as a therapist and so on, and from there, but it really started to not look like a thing anymore. You know, it's kind of, it didn't make sense. Didn't make sense to work that way with people. And I knew that I could no longer do that. And I knew that, and I was like, it was one day not long after, or I can't remember, a few weeks or a few months after I'd had my experience, I was talking to a friend in this conversation, in this understanding that we're talking of here, and I said that I'd got in a car one day. I always had this thing about getting in cars because my dad was killed in a vehicle accident, and I said that I'd got in a car and this guy had started driving a little bit funny, you know, and I had this response to it, you know, and I said, that's because of my trauma, you know, and she said to me, is that true? That's all she said to me, is that true? You know, and I just went, ding, it was just like a light bulb went off in my head, you know, and I just thought, oh my God, you know, it's me that joins the dots. It's me that joins the dots between my behavior, my responses to the past, you know. And what happened was I just realized that I was the connector of the dots, you know. I was the creator of the trauma in my own mind and adding it to my experience of today and making it mean something. And, you know, in my explorations and work and evolution of understanding since then, you know, I've kind of really seen that, you know, that we can become completely free of the story and of the experience of trauma, you know, when we see the relationship between thought and experience, you know, in our own mind. And that's not to say I don't have these physical responses to things at times, you know, like contractions of the body, I'll call them, residual programming of the nervous system. I don't know what the correct term is, you know, but like what happened when I stopped creating the story of trauma in my own mind, I gradually found that it dissipated and I stopped talking about it, you know, that it just pretty much disappeared, you know, that it had stopped having an effect on me. It stopped being the story of my life, you know, it stopped being the very thing that made me respond in certain ways to certain things. And, you know, that makes complete sense, that if we're creating our experience, you know, when I was creating the story of Jason, you know, on a daily basis, when I was creating, I was like I describe it as the lead role in the character of the movie playing in my own mind. You know, that's who I was. You know, it's kind of like when I stopped creating that and started living my life more in the present moment and started just noticing that noise going on in my head, you know, that like these thoughts, you know, they just drift by randomly all the time, consistently all day long. And sometimes I grab hold of them and give them more energy and take form, and I live the human experience. You know, I ride the roller coaster of life, and then I realize, oh yeah, I'm okay. I've always been okay, you know. And it's like sometimes I just get caught in my own mind, in my own thinking, and you know, since then, since that experience, which was, I think, over 5 years ago, you know, like that, my life has been so full of joy and connection and wonderful experience. You know, I stopped going to meetings at that point. I haven't been back to meetings. I haven't said, I'm Jason, I'm an addict anymore, because I don't believe that's true. I didn't die when I stopped going. And a lot of my friends are in 12 steps, and it's quite funny because they have this argument between them now, because when they go to meetings and they still tell that story that I don't know anyone that's left meetings and been okay, you know, and one friend to another says, what about Jason? You know, what about Jason? He doesn't go to meetings anymore and he seems to be living a good life, you know, and they have that little thing between them, you know. So a lot of my friends are in 12 steps, you know, and I still have strong relationships, and a lot of them have been looking in this direction too, of what I've been talking about and getting curious about it. So, you know, it's always a nice experience. But yeah, I just see it completely different now. It just feels like it's something that happened that I can still feel about, I can still feel sad about, you know, and it's okay to feel sad, but it no longer dominates the narrative of my life or the story of me, you know. It's just a neutral event that was tragic, you know. And you know, I think I'll end there.
Thanks, Jason. Thank you. I couldn't find my unmute button there. Thanks so much for sharing all of that, and you know, just what an incredible journey. One of the things that came to me, just in very general terms, was, you know, that broad identification of acting out unconsciously, you know, and as a, you know, from childhood in all sorts of ways, and you know, eventually drink for me became the, you know, the sort of primary way of acting out. And around about the time that I got sober, being told that, you know, you're like this because of these things that happened in your childhood. And so it wasn't just it was that I bought into the story, absolutely 100%, but it wasn't it was also what was being told to me by people who seemed to know what they were talking about. And really, I carried that around for something like the next 20 years, until I stumbled across the principles of the inside out understanding. And my first insight was, I'm not broken and nobody's broken, which is not a denial of things that have happened in the past, you know, important things, and it's not a denial of any of that, but it is an affirmation of the fact that the essence of each of us is whole and complete, and the only thing that's going on in any moment is you know, what the thought that I'm entertaining, the feelings that I'm feeling today are 100% a reflection of the thought I'm entertaining, most of which just pops into my head unconsciously. But yeah, like you, the tremendous freedom, but and also like you, a shift in because not everybody wants that. Not everybody wants that freedom. You know, people have dropped me because I'm not really interested in that conversation of, you know, my brokenness, or, you know, because it can be very interesting that the delving into what happened and the supposed explanation of why I'm like this now. But it's interesting, but ultimately fruitless. And yeah, so listen, thank you so much for everything that you shared. I really appreciate it. Are you open to some questions and feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. I love to. That's why I saw quite a lot of people on the call, so I just thought, you know, if there's people that share.
Lovely. Barbara, before we hand it over, you know, open it up, generally, I wonder if there's anything that you'd like to share at this point.
Let's take some time to hear from other people, and if there's time, I'll add a 2 cents at the end. But I'd really like to hear if other people have questions and comments.
Sure. Yeah, we'd really welcome that. So please, if anything that Jason has shared or anything else is just on top for you now, please do just unmute yourself and come in.
Hi, Jason. It's very good to hear you share. Hi, I'm Cheryl. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Cheryl. Hi.
Jason, we know each other.
Yep.
So it was really, I've never actually heard you tell your story, so that was very cool. And one of the things that, like, I can totally relate to, spending years thinking that all of the things that happened mattered today, which I run drug and alcohol treatment programs, and the struggle for me is I usually take over companies that are, I usually go in and take over companies, mergers and things of that nature. And there's always that, what you talked about, the psychotherapist approach. And it's very difficult at times because people take it personally that they have so much education and so much knowledge that I'm bringing something to the table that they don't want to hear about. Because how can it be that they don't know something else? I'm a psychologist. I get that. I learned all that stuff, and I didn't believe there was anything that anybody could teach me. I thought I knew every approach there was. And so sometimes, you know, having someone like you share your story can have such an impact for so many people. And I can tell you that I'd say probably most of the people on this call are my staff. So I'm very proud of you all, by the way, for taking the time to jump on this. So thank you. And Meredith, thank you for telling us all about it, because I didn't even know. But like having somebody like you talk to other therapists, not to change their mind, because like that's personal, you know, people see what they see when they see it, but to understand that there's not a, oh, and Laura's there too. It's not to say that there's anything wrong with what they're doing, because you said it. It's so innocent. It's so innocent. And yet you can see their pain as they're trying. And I knew my pain as I was seeking and searching and trying. And I just think that for most of us, we don't like to see people suffer when we know there's another way. So we keep talking and trying to have people like you or Christian. I don't really know you, but I've heard of you. So having other people say it, because, you know, I brought like Bill Pettit to our New Hampshire to talk to our, I brought George Pransky, because the way I put it out there may not be heard by someone, but if a lot of different people speak, I had a lot of different people hear it differently. And it's just such a beautiful thing when you don't have to think you're broken and suffer. So thank you all for putting this together. And I just wanted to say hi, Jason, and so good to hear you, and thank you. I didn't know it was you today, so.
That's good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Cheryl. Lovely. Thank you very much.
It's nice to see you, Cheryl, too. I met you years ago with Joe Bailey at Farnham. So, yeah, and I'm down in Massachusetts, so hopefully we can connect. But
I would love that. Love that.
yeah, that would be
We have
great.
A couple new programs that I'm working with, so that'd be great.
Good, good. We'd like that. So, you know, like I said earlier, you know, I think that we were so well intentioned in our field. Really, truly, we were. I worked with some of the most compassionate, kind, wonderful human beings. All we wanted to do was help relieve people's suffering. But once we understood, you know, like the logic, it doesn't even make sense that to heal from something, you keep taking the scab off of it, you know? I mean, it just, you know, in hindsight, which is certainly 2020 and a wonderful insight, you know, it really doesn't make sense. And I saw this with Vietnam vets. You know, Vietnam vets came home from World War II and they just got on with their lives. They got on with their lives. They didn't really talk about it. You know, they got to work, they got busy, right? And then with Vietnam vets, we created PTSD, and we kept bringing them back into groups, and we kept taking the scab off on a weekly basis. And they became more and more fragile and more vulnerable and more depressed. Like Jason was saying, you know, every time you talk about these horrible things, you feel awful. Like I can recall some really awful things in my life that have happened. And when you start thinking about it and you start nurturing those thoughts, you know, you feel like you're going to vomit. I mean, it's painful. It really hurts. So again, in retrospect, we were told, oh, this is going to help. This is the medicine that's going to help. And, you know, people are very convinced of that. But if you really look at the results that we're getting, you know, we're not getting a lot of results from that. People are stuck, are trapped in this notion that they can't, there's no place to go, that they are trapped with this for the rest of their lives. And this is such a hopeful understanding, to realize that we are healing moment to moment. It's the nature of the way our psychology works, and that we are able to move beyond things and to see things with fresh insights and new ways of seeing. And we truly, the only way we are experiencing the past is when we think about it. And just seeing the simplicity and the beauty of that is such a gift to the people that I've worked with this understanding. And, you know, I think that's really what we were trying to point to with the book, with this. You know, we were both sort of like concerned about putting this chapter in about the trauma, because there are a lot of people, you know, who are not only attached to their trauma, but very attached to the belief that it would be malpractice or very unkind to go backwards. You know, that somehow this idea that trauma was this defining feature of our lives was a really kind and important advance in psychology. So I, as a psychotherapist, I was a little hesitant to go there and say, maybe not. But I think when people can see that, it's just the results of that are just remarkable. So just being willing to keep an open mind, to listen, for all of you guys who are new to this, and you know, this is the first time you're hearing this, or this, you know, you've heard it from Cheryl. Truly, you know, Jason, I really mirror everything Jason has said, and Cheryl, that once you see what this is pointing to, it's going to change your clients' lives in ways that you can't even begin to imagine. And at least in my world, I worked in the treatment field for about 35 years before I discovered this. You know, I saw people who were just retreads. We would just see them come back and come back and come back and come back. We don't see that so much anymore. You know, I don't want to go into numbers, but we really do see people who are, you know, who are better. You're like, oh, this is good. I'm good. You know, I'm moving on. You know, and that's what a great gift. I mean, you know, I don't think really in my career, I don't think I really thought of being done as an option. You know, you're told you never recovered, you're only in recovery. It's a lifelong journey. You're always going to be broken. You always have this disease, whatever. And I know for a lot of people in the treatment field, they think that's a very dangerous belief. So I just ask you to keep an open mind and just try to listen in a way that you can see something so powerfully fresh and life-changing. So if anybody else has anything, or any skepticism, or anything you want to raise, I'm sure we'd all be glad to hear from you.
To jump on you.
Yeah.
Only kidding.
No, to listen carefully, and then jump on, you know.
No.
Hi guys. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much. This is just, you know, when Jason, you finished sharing, I really, you know, nothing came to mind, because I could just feel like the love and the peace. I feel that way so much more often. than I did, I don't know, even 2 or 3 years ago. So I've been in recovery for a long time. I started working in the treatment industry as soon as I left treatment, and I think they only had me answer phones because they were worried about me, but I did it anyway. But I remember very vividly going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and the old, there'd be the old guy there who's 87 years old. He's been going every day for his whole life, and he'd pound his fist on the table and say, "If I don't come here, I'm going to die, or I'm going to drink, and for me to drink is to die." And that was not why I got sober. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a church basement, and it sounded very scary to me. It didn't sound like a good time, And but I went, and I did everything that they told me to do, just out of desperation to feel anything other than terrible. Or I would call my sponsor, and I'd have a quote unquote resentment, or be upset with somebody, and they'd say, write about it. And then I would write about it. And for whatever reason, I never felt better. Like I just, because it was about them, and it was about something outside of myself all the time. The world around me was like doing all these things to me, and and Cheryl brought this. I've worked with and for Cheryl for a very long time, and she brought this to Farnham Center, and I'll never forget the day she was like, "Meredith, you need some one-on-one supervision with Joe Bailey," and I knew I was in trouble. And I had an understanding, and I could see. I had insights going off all the time, and just I call them like my light bulb moments. But really too, the coolest thing about it is to look back and kind of realize that I've had, we've all had all this resiliency all along. AA told me that I was powerless, and it turns out I got a lot of power, and a lot of good or bad choices to make, and even the bad ones I learned from. But what a relief. And I'll share with you though, after I kind of was woken up to it and started to have some experiences, and kind of getting away from the posse, the crew, and people that know what the hell we're talking about. I kind of fell back into that trap of just like working, and I'll be happy when Friday comes, instead of just being happy now, in the moment. And I got to a point, last year, I think it was last year, or a year and a half ago, maybe it's 2 years ago, Cheryl, but anyways, where, again, life was happening to me. It wasn't, my ego, kind of took over, and the everybody else, and how I was experiencing things at the time. I was like having I thought a mental breakdown. Like I'm like, I don't even know if I can be in this career anymore, and this is all I know. And helping people is where my heart is, and all of these things. Cheryl just very simply said to me, in one of my meltdown moments, Meredith, maybe you're not having a breakdown, maybe it's a breakthrough. And just, and I think that that's really all it takes for anybody that's, kind of questioning. This isn't something you do. Like I always get like a little, when the clients say, I'm working on it. I'm like, there's nothing to really work on, and just to be able to know that, my thoughts, my gosh, if I told you all the thoughts that I was thinking even this morning, you guys wouldn't, want me on this call. You'd want to lock me up somewhere. But, like just to be able to normalize and understand that this is how we operate as human beings, and to kind of, as long as there's that open-mindedness, we have those moments, and people come to it on their own, right? And I think my biggest thing is that I tend to want them to understand before they're going to understand. You know, I try to bring people to a certain point, and that's not my job. You know, they're gonna get it when they get it or not. You know, it's up to each human to have their own experience with it and understanding. But anyway, I just wanted to say that to the understanding of how my brain protects me, how it tries to keep me safe, how it also, you know, messes with my head and gets me in weird moods and places or whatever it may be. But just to understand that, you know, how normal it is. And that's just, you know, who we are as you know, human beings. And I'll tell you, you know, like I don't, it saved my life. I'll say that, you know, I mean, I can call myself an alcoholic. I can call myself a workaholic. I can, you know, people say workaholic like it's a bad thing. I don't see anything wrong with it. But it just to be able to know that everybody operates this way, and it allows me the ability to understand human beings and to be less judgmental, to be more open, because at the core of all of us is love, right? At least that's how I feel. And that's what I was looking for my whole life, you know, like, just to, you know, people would say, you got to love yourself. That comes from within. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, where am I going? Where, you know, I didn't even know what that meant. And, you know, this whole, you know, these principles gave me the understanding of what that means, you know, what self-love means, what, you know, compassion and the ability to be gentle with other people, because I understand how we work. But anyway, so that's all I got. I don't want to ramble on, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. And Cheryl, maybe next time we'll make it mandatory.
Meredith, thank you for everything that you shared. And I think if I heard Cheryl right, like you shared this event with others. So I really, really appreciate that. Yeah, that was lovely. And but before I hand it back to Jason, I did just want to say, you know, Barbara and I, throughout this whole process of writing the book and publishing it and everything else, have always been clear that nothing we say is kind of anti-AA. I mean, that how I see it is that this has been an evolution of my recovery. And I'm one of the people who does still sometimes go to AA when I feel like it. And I often find in a meeting, and not least in your part of the world, because I lived in New Hampshire in the Upper Valley for a while, and I was back there a few years ago. Often a meeting is just like a call, like this is, it's a sort of almost a sacred experience for me. It's a place where it's easy in the conversation with others and the connection with others to come back home, or whatever the expression we like, to come back to my true self. You know, and just hearing your accent, it takes me back there. I had some lovely, you know, wonderful experiences at meetings there. But I think the wonderful thing about this understanding is people begin to know what they need for themselves in any given moment, as opposed to following somebody else's script, and know that in a way that, you know, I found that I could trust myself for the first time in my life, rather than running everything by what should I be doing. So yeah. We are coming to the end of our time. We are doing these calls monthly, and the next one is we have Joe Bailey as a guest. I'm so grateful for you all being here. I'm particularly grateful for you, Jason. Barbara, I noticed you're unmuted. Did you want to say something before we hand it back to
No,
Jason?
I was just going to remind people that our next call is with Joe, who some of these people know. And he's going to be talking about an evolution in addiction understanding and resilience. So we hope that you'll all come, and make it mandatory if you have to. No, we'd love to see you.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here and your contribution. And Jason, we're coming towards the end of our time. Would you like to take us out?
Yeah, wow, what a powerful experience. And it's true what you said, you know, it's like I'm kind of halfway through writing my own book, you know, and, you know, I talked about my 12-step experience and my friends, you know, and it just, I can't say anything but good stuff about that time in my life. It saved my life, you know, at the time when it was needed it. But there is this point when, you know, for me, when I kind of knew that there was something more, you know, and there was something beyond conceptual understanding or theoretical understanding trying to get me well, you know, and that's kind of what we're pointing to here, you know, and what Meredith, you know, rightly talked about, you know, that the innate part of us, you know, that's never damaged, never broken, that's always okay, that can't be harmed, you know. And when I experienced that, you know, that was the ultimate freedom, because from that place of knowing, of that place of experiencing that, it's like I feel somewhat, you know, that I have experiences of being human still. I get lost in the human experience. I have crazy thoughts too, and moments of madness, you know. It's like I've got 2 children, you know, they drive me nuts at times. But like there's always this knowing, always, you know. And I often say to people that when you get this understanding, it's not like you transcend the human experience and float around cross-legged in the lotus position with your palms up, being all spiritual. You know, that's not what a spiritual awakening is. But what it is no matter what the experience is, you know, there's always a knowing of home. There's always a knowing that there's nothing to do about this. It'll pass. It'll be okay, you know. And that's kind of, you know, the most beautiful thing that I've got from this, that I haven't become superhuman, you know, or spiritual, but I have always got this knowing that whatever's happening, it's okay and it'll pass. And that's kind of, you know, the most powerful thing that I think I've seen, you know. And I don't know, I haven't got any, I'd love to give some real profound ending, you know, something really amazing to say, but, you know, that's it, you know.
Well, that's great. That's perfect.
Thank you,
Absolutely
Jason.
perfect. Yeah. Well,
Awesome.
we are at the top of the time, so I'm just going to stop the